Let's go straight to our correspondent in Moscow, Nick Holdsworth, who's awaiting us. Nick, good evening to you. We're hearing there about, obviously, Vladimir Putin talking about some kind of optimism about the situation in Ukraine. This, of course, Macron's preoccupation. What do we think the possibilities are of peace in Ukraine coming out of this meeting between Macron and Putin?
They remain fairly slim, to be honest. This was the one positive takeaway from today's summit between President Macron and President Putin. The Russians really have been dragging their heels somewhat over the so-called Minsk Accords. This is the peace process that was kick-started a few years ago involving Paris, Berlin, Kiev and Moscow, the so-called Normandy process, which is what Macron is very keen to restart. There is something of a fresh optimism approach right now, because there's a new president in Ukraine, this former TV comic Vladimir Zelensky, who has very much been pushing for a new peace protest to bring stability to the eastern provinces of Ukraine. And Putin did respond positively to that today. That said, it will not be a speedy process, that's for sure.
And in terms of what this meeting means, obviously much at stake, but between the two men, there's a certain power play. What do people in Russia make of this meeting?
The Russian press this evening has been reporting those comments which Vladimir Putin made in response to President Macron's note about the police crackdown on pro-democracy protesters in Moscow. The Russians don't like having their internal politics criticised, and Putin at first politely ignored Macron's reference, rather diplomatic though it was, during the press conference. But then when he was asked a follow-up question by a reporter, he shot back saying that things are no different in France, that 11 people have died and 2,500 have been injured during the Yellow Jacket protests in Paris and other cities in France over the past few months, and that in Russia nobody has the right to break the law, they should abide by the law. And comments reported in the Russian press were, if anything, a bit stronger, with Putin talking about the fact that people don't have the right to make an absurdity of the authorities or, in fact, to challenge them. As we saw there, President Macron followed up by saying that at least the protesters in France have the right to stand in elections and to protest peacefully. But Putin really was rattled. He doesn't like Macron very much, that's quite clear. And he'd rather be dealing with somebody like President Trump, because he feels that that's more fit into the stature that he's trying to achieve on the world stage at the moment.
Nick, what do you think this all says about the relations then between Europe and Russia at this stage?
Cautious optimism that things may slowly get better. Certainly Macron is doing his best, knowing that things in Germany aren't very stable. Obviously, Merkel won't be Chancellor for very much longer. There seems to be a threat of an economic recession in Germany as well. So Europe really is setting out its stall, trying to restore relations with Russia. Putin would like to see those relations restored too. The economic sanctions have really hurt Russia, even though the Russians try to deny that. So perhaps cautious optimism, but these things move at a fairly glacial pace.
Nick Holdsworth in Moscow, thank you very much indeed.